all of my current sewing projects have had to go on hold as a result of my back injury. And this has left me at a little bit of a loss because I still want to sew. And my cape project really made me realise that I do still enjoy sewing and find it really creatively fulfilling. And yet this injury has prevented me from not only using a sewing machine, but also, as a result of the medication I'm now on, having the mental capacity to plan and problem solve and all that also comes with sewing and is also the parts that I enjoy. So I've been at a bit of a loss what to do because I don't want to just sort of admit defeat. I want to try and keep sewing in any way I can. And that's led me down a couple of different rabbit holes in terms of research, in terms of hand sewing. So the thing about hand sewing is I have done some hand sewing before. I've done some hand sewn costume projects, and there's a part of me that is still interested in pursuing that and trying that. It's just not good for right now, given the state of my brain and the brain fog and the way other ways I'm affected by the pain. I can't face such a big project. And so I've been looking at trying something that is not only smaller, but also that as a medium benefits from hand sewing or is only able to be done by hand. You know, there's no machine equivalent. And I stumbled across this technique called English paper piecing. Now, in England, I was like, wow, I've never heard of that. And then I realised it's just what we would call, or I would call traditionally in this country, patchwork. So traditional patchwork, and you sew it onto a paper template and then you sew them together all by hand. And this is very popular in the quilting world, and you can create quite unique compositions as a result of this because all the pieces have to tessellate nicely together. And particularly popular are shapes like hexagons, which would be just incredibly difficult to seam together on a sewing machine because of all the angles. It would be possible, but it would be so fiddly, you might as well be doing it by hand, particularly if you want the level of accuracy that makes this kind of patchwork impressive. So I think that's what I'm going to try. Now, I'm doing this project where I'm trying to use up a lot of my scrap fabric. So I think that also lends itself to patchwork. So I'm hoping I can kind of combine two lines of thinking currently in my life and experiment with some English paper piecing. So what I'm doing to begin with is I've sorted out my scrap fabric. So I've got jersey scraps over there, which are going to go into the dog bed. But what I've done is I've sorted out all my linen bits and pieces. I had more and I sold them, but I found even more. So I've sort of gone through and they're all solids. Lots of them are some of them are bits of alteration. Some of them are offcuts from old projects. I mean, some of these I've had for years and years and years. This was a job I did. Fabric came from a job I did when I still lived in London, which is coming up 10 years. So, or maybe not quite 10 years, 8 years or something like that. So I'm just going through and ironing what I have. So I have a lot of this teal. This was offcuts from a project. So I've got my little iron and my little ironing board. And I'm just starting by ironing the scrap fabric so that I can see what I have. And then I have a couple of books about patchwork and quilting, but they are very dated. One is almost entirely about English paper piecing. I have this one, which is called Wearable Quilts. It's very 70s, it's quite dated. The language it uses is quite dated as well. And it's American, so it's all very American quilting tradition and all the American terms for things. So that's a little bit disorientating, given that the other patchwork book I have is very traditionally English. But I am basically learning from YouTube. So I have no idea what I'm going to make. I have made the decision to not do hexagons. I'm doing squares. So I should explain English paper piecing. One of the things that I find confusing is that the American terminology, quilting and patchwork, are synonymous, whereas in Britain, patchwork refers to sewing together tiny bits of fabric to make a design or to use up scraps or whatever. And quilting is the act of using wadding to quilt it. So traditionally in England, you could just take a piece of fabric and sandwich it with wadding and quilt it, and that's a quilt. And you could patchwork something. So for example, the Jane Austen coverlet is an example that's often referred to as a quilt, but it doesn't have any wadding in and it isn't actually quilted. It's just a patchwork blanket, essentially, known as a coverlet, where they've sewn scraps of fabric together to make a new piece of fabric. And so it's been quite confusing for me to get my head around that, because my understanding of quilting is the English understanding, where you are actually doing the act of quilting with wadding or batting. Again, terms are different. I know it as wadding. It's known as batting in other parts of the world. And patchwork is sewing patches together to make a design or make a new piece of fabric. Gosh, I've got a very long salvage bit here. English paper piecing is a patchwork technique whereby you use a paper template to get a really accurate shape. So you tack or baste the fabric onto the paper shape so that you're really accurate with the shape of it, and so then they all tessellate and fit nicely together to form a design. So when I say hexagons, a very common, particularly in Britain, the most common or the most popular paper shape to use would have been hexagons, and you get a sort of honeycomb look to the final thing. But of course, with a hexagon, you have 6 sides to sew together, whereas with a square, as in an actual square, because confusingly, the hexagons are also sometimes referred to as squares. So a 4-sided square, you've only got 4 sides to sew together. So that is my logic. And also I feel like it's probably easier to not get out of line with squares than it is with hexagons. So I have no idea whether any of that will be usable. So I have no design in place currently in my mind. My intention is just to make some squares, see how many I am able to get out of the fabric, because I've got lots of this blue and I've got lots of this red, but I've only got little bits of like cream and green and some of this yellow. So I don't know whether I'll do a sort of traditional patchwork design or a quilt design, you know, when people talk about things like trip around the world or flying geese and all of that sort of stuff. I don't know whether I'll bother with that, whether I'll just sew them together randomly or alternate so that I've got like a red row and a green row or whatever it is. Just depends on how many I can get out of all this fabric, and we'll go from there. So it's quite a freeing process, this. I have no end product in mind. It is just about trying a new technique, learning new things and experimenting. And I'm excited. So I'm going to carry on ironing all this fabric. And I'll catch up with you at some point. If you're wondering why the watering can is here, it's because I was using it to fill up the iron because I couldn't find a jug. Anyway, I wanted to show you because I found these in a local charity shop for £3, and these are English paper piecing templates. So you know, the idea being that those two are the same size, but like you use one for your paper template, or let's use this set that I've used in the end. Quite often they come like this. So you have like the frame that goes around the center. So this is the size that the squares will end up. And this is sort of a seam allowance guide. So you know how big to cut your fabric. Now cutting the fabric, you don't have to be that accurate, but cutting the paper templates, you do. So I spent a long time cutting with a Stanley knife and a cutting mat and a ruler, little paper squares. And having been watching Kate at the Last Homely House, she recommended like children's book pages. These are envelopes from birthday cards. I don't know if you can see, some of them have got a little bit of the glue overlap on, and some of them have like mum on. Look there, there's an M of mum part of it. So my finished patchwork pieces will end up this size. And then I sew them all together. I have no idea whether I've been accurate enough with this. They do mostly line up, but I mean, I am a human. I can't mechanically produce them exactly the same. And I was when I bought this selection of, I was fascinated by like, so you've got half hexes here, because obviously when you get them all lined up like that, or rather more like that, you end up with a gap that you need to fill in to get a straight edge. And so that's what the half hexes are for. So I've got this big hexagon. I've got this like 5, is that a pentagon? Yeah, 5-sided pentagon. And I think that's so that you can do that and make like designs like that. Little diamond, little triangle. Again, I think sometimes when you line them up like this, you need a diamond to go in the middle there. Anyway, I literally just happened to come across these in a charity shop, and I was looking at going to the quilt shop anyway to buy Perspex templates, and I was like, brilliant, plastic free, I'll have those. Not sure I'll ever be brave enough to attempt this tiny one. What's that? Is that 1/2 inch? 3/4 of an inch. The ones I've got are 1.5 inches. Yes. So I thought that was kind of like a reasonable size to start with. Of course, usually quilters use a rotary cutter. And if you've been here for any length of time, I cannot use a rotary cutter because of my bad shoulder. So I don't really know how I'm going to do this. Given that it doesn't have to be that accurate, maybe we just do chalk. And I chalk it and then cut with scissors. So this is by no means an English paper piecing tutorial. But I'll sort of demonstrate what happens now. Now, do I bin these little bits that I'm trimming off? I think the answer has to be yes, really, doesn't it? Unless they're gonna fit one of them tiny weeny hexagons on. So then, essentially what happens is I put my paper template in the middle and I fold the fabric round, and I've seen some people glue baste it, and I did buy one of these glue pens. Is it in here? No, because I have been trying this. I confess, I've been trying this before. And so this was what I started with. And this design, you can see it on the front of the book here, is this. This was too much for me. I was running before I could walk. And I also made the mistake of, I've since learnt you need, for patchwork, it's better to have fabrics of the same weight. And so this is sort of like a synthetic polyestery satin thing, and this is a very tweedy wool. And so they just don't really behave nicely together. And look, you can see how thin and that is compared to the wool. I might try and revisit this, but for now, squares. So I don't think I'm going to start basting. I think I'm just going to cut. I'm just going to sit here and cut squares until I'm bored. Will one of these fit? No. Okay. To actually basting these on. So I'm just using any old thread. This is probably cheap overlocker thread that's not very good quality. So I'm not doubling my thread. Look at that. It's unusual for me. I'm going to put a great big knot in the end so it's easy to undo. And then I'm going to use this as sort of a guide to centre my bit of paper. Okay. I'll fold in my first side. Give it a good crease. And then the way my 1950s book tells me to do it, but also Kate at the Last Homely House does it, is she bastes through the paper like that. And then do the next corner. Nice and big stitches. Again, the next one. Last side. And then just like that, fasten it off. And there we have it. Square number 1. How neat is that? So here it is, my design. I had a few left over, so I don't know what I'll do with those. Something, I'm sure. But yeah, I'm going to start with this central row. And I think what I'll do is I'll just leave this out and then I'll take like one row at a time into the garden. I have no idea how long this is going to take me.
So here it is, all finished. Well, I say finished. I really like this. I really love the way it looks, and I really enjoyed the process, and I think that's nice because I've not enjoyed sewing anything for a very long time, but this was so satisfying. I've left all the papers in because I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I don't know whether I want this to be like the central motif of a quilt and I keep adding things around it. Maybe I play with some different shapes. Or is that too ambitious? Or should I make this a cushion cover? Because it's square. And I think I had originally intended when I started to make a cushion. It also goes beautifully with Woody's red sofa. So it would make a nice cushion. But until I make my mind up, I'm not taking the papers out because I have learnt from all the videos I've watched of people doing this that leaving the papers in supports all that stitching so that you don't end up pulling seams as you're making whatever it is you want to make with this. It was so fun. It was so fun. And I want to do more. I have more scrap fabric, so I could just keep it with these linen colours, or I could mix it up. I also, when I was experimenting with some patchwork, made this panel out of scrap fabric of Woody's, which I quite like. So I don't know whether I want like to try and make this into a cushion, and we could have red on the front and pheasants on the back. It's like patchwork pheasants. You can really see a full pheasant. But then this, I'd need to rework to also be square. Maybe I take 2 of the squares off. Oh, annoyingly, I've seamed it in the other way. But oh well. I was going to say I'd take 2 of the squares off and put something around it maybe, and then that becomes the back of the cushion. How do we feel about these 2 together? Or do we think it doesn't matter because you'll never see the 2 of them at the same time? Let me know what you think. Cushion, double-sided cushion. Do I keep going and make it bigger? I've just had a text message that something is arriving today that I've ordered that should hopefully make my quilting journey a lot easier, particularly on this right shoulder. So I'm really excited about that. Can't believe how much I enjoyed that. This is definitely one I'm going to do again. Definitely. Thanks for watching. See you next time.